A confusing new twist in a nationwide food safety investigation. The FDA now says Taylor Farms is still at the center of a probe into a growing multi-state Cyclospora outbreak, even after the agency said a lettuce sample from the company had falsely tested positive for the parasite. The FDA says the lab error does not change the basis for its investigation, which says it still points to Taylor Farms. The company voluntarily recalled iceberg lettuce distributed to 27 states over the weekend. Joining us now, former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He's a CNBC contributor and serves on the boards of directors at both Pfizer and United Healthcare. Scott, I never, ever see you when there's good news. The day we cure cancer, I would like you to come on television because you join us for a deadly pandemic and now explosive diarrhea across the country. I am sorry for that. Help us understand what in the world is going on. Why is the FDA still pointing to Taylor Farms? People just don't know if they can eat a salad.
Yeah, look, the strength of the epidemiology evidence that they had, a lot of it came out of Michigan, actually, is very strong here. I think that the evidence certainly points towards Taylor Farms. It's a sole provider in the Great Lakes region, and if you look at the scope of the outbreak, there was a huge cluster of infections in the Great Lakes region. About 60% of the people who were infected reported eating at a Taco Bell. Only 4% of the public eats at Taco Bell restaurants, and Taylor Farms is a sole supplier to that restaurant. There was also cases linked to bagged lettuce that was sold in that region. So I think that the FDA is relying largely on the strength of that epi evidence, most of which was collected by public health officials in the state of Michigan. The test itself, I think, was a red herring. I wouldn't rely too much on one test result. I'm not even sure why they included it in the initial public disclosure on this in their public statement about Taylor Farms. This is notoriously hard to test for. I'm not surprised they got a false positive sample. But really what they're relying on here to make the case linking this to Taylor Farms is the strength of that epi evidence in terms of people who ate lettuce, reported getting sick following eating lettuce, and the fact that Taylor Farms was a sole supplier in the locations where people procured the lettuce.
Then should they not have gone public before it was confirmed? Because people are just so confused at this point.
Yeah, I think it's largely confirmed. When I look at what the FDA put out, I think that the case they made based on the epidemiological evidence is very strong. You can question whether or not they should have included that single test result. Typically, we would hold back a test result like that. I think they probably wanted to strengthen the public disclosure, and they had it in hand. But this is very hard to test for. The only human sample is stool, and oftentimes people present after the infection, so it's not easy to test for. If you want to test a patient for it, you have to order a very specific test. The test that doctors use, called an ONA test, testing for ova and parasites in the stool, doesn't typically test for cyclospora, so you have to specifically request that test. And then the test that we use to detect it on food samples is also unreliable. And there's no genotyping here like there is with E. coli or Salmonella, where you can do whole genome sequencing and actually isolate a particular strain and locate it in the patient and locate it back on the farm. You don't have that kind of precision when it comes to these kinds of parasites. So testing is difficult, and typically they wouldn't rely on testing evidence alone, or even in large measure, they would rely on the epidemiological evidence. And that is very strong in this case. 90% of the people that Michigan public health officials interviewed who became sick and had confirmed cases of cyclospora infection reported eating lettuce in the past week. And so the link here seems to be pretty strong.
So are you eating lettuce right now? Like, what is your advice to people when they go to the grocery store? Should they buy iceberg or not?
Yeah, look, we see these infections in the summertime, so this isn't uncommon to see cyclospora outbreaks. This one is the largest that I remember on record, and it does appear to be clustered in that Great Lakes region. Taylor Farms is a sole supplier in that region. So I think that they've isolated the source of the large outbreak in this case. Taylor Farms is not shipping a lot of product. Restaurants aren't sourcing from it. I think if you want to be safe, you can source your lettuce from a local farm. There's no documented outbreak in the United States from people who sourced lettuce from a local farm, and you can buy a whole head of lettuce. The risk becomes more manifest when you're buying bagged lettuce, where you could have a single contaminated head of lettuce cut up into dozens of different bags, so it can contaminate a large sample of bagged lettuce. So if you want to be safe, buy a whole head of lettuce, and buy a head of lettuce that's sourced from the United States. Right now, the only large region that's harvesting lettuce is Mexico. There's some being harvested in Arizona, but California is not harvesting this time of year. But you can get locally sourced lettuce in your local community at a grocer or at a farmer's market.
HHS Secretary RFK Jr. was asked about whether the recent cuts to federal health agencies could have affected the response, and I want to share what he said.
Any response to some of the criticism that the cuts to the federal agencies under your leadership has slowed the response to the outbreak?
Those criticisms are invalid. We've had no cuts in our surveillance program. We did cuts in the Food Net program, but they were for redundant surveillance, and all the states will tell you that. We're still doing forensics. We're still doing surveillance in all the states.
What do you think?
Look, I don't think they cut redundant surveillance. They definitely cut some important components of the food surveillance system in this country, including an expert body at USDA that helps advise states on foodborne outbreaks in the country. Whether or not those cuts translated into some of the deficiencies that we saw, particularly in the part of CDC, I think FDA did a good job here tracing it back to the food source. I think CDC didn't do the initial detection in a timely fashion and relied a lot on state officials. Now, whether or not some of the reductions that we saw, particularly from DOJ, played into that is hard to say. The group that does these parasitic infection outbreaks at CDC is different than the foodborne illness group, and it's not as good of a group.
All right, Scott, thank you for joining us. Every time you're here, you make us smarter, you make us safer. I appreciate it.